Christmas Eve, 2009. A stand-up comedian and his buddy sit down in front of two laptops and start talking. No topic, no plan, no script. The show goes out live on a platform most people have never heard of, to an audience that numbers in the dozens. Joe Rogan is best known at this point for hosting Fear Factor, the network show where people ate bugs for prize money. This is not the origin story of a media empire. It looks nothing like one. The early episodes were comedian friends, UFC fighters, and the occasional scientist Rogan had become personally obsessed with. The format was just long conversations. No editor, no commercial breaks, no segment producer cutting him off at 4 minutes. Talk radio had been too cautious to try anything like it for decades. By 2015, the show was ranking consistently at the top of every major podcast chart. Listeners trusted Rogan because he felt unscripted, genuinely curious, like a friend who happened to know interesting people. That trust would turn out to be the whole story. In May 2020, Spotify signed Rogan to an exclusive deal reportedly worth at least $200 million over 3.5 years. To put that number in context, Spotify had paid roughly the same amount to acquire entire podcast companies outright. This was for one show, one host. The deal gave Spotify its biggest podcast across more than 90 markets. It also handed a man with no journalism training and no editorial oversight a distribution infrastructure comparable in raw reach to a television network, with none of the standards that television networks are expected to maintain. By the summer of 2021, the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. Rogan dedicated a full episode to promoting ivermectin, an anti-parasitic drug, as both a treatment and a preventative for COVID-19, despite no credible clinical evidence supporting that use. He told his audience that people in high-risk areas should take it, that it would protect them from infection. That claim was not supported by science. The episode reached an estimated 11 million listeners, nearly 4 times the primetime audience of Fox News or MSNBC on a given night. The largest news organizations in the country were being lapped by a man in a studio who had started with 2 laptops and no plan. On December 31, 2021, Rogan hosted Dr. Robert Malone, who described himself as an inventor of mRNA vaccines, a claim disputed by mainstream scientists and not the scholarly consensus. During the episode, Malone promoted the theory of mass formation psychosis, a concept used to explain why people trusted vaccines. The phenomenon does not appear in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. Within weeks, more than 270 doctors, nurses, and scientists had signed an open letter demanding Spotify adopt a formal misinformation policy. Neil Young pulled his music catalog from the platform. Joni Mitchell followed. Spotify's response was to add a small content advisory label and say nothing further. Rogan's defense, repeated across multiple apologies and public statements, was consistent. He was not trying to spread misinformation. He never claimed to be a credible source. He was just a curious guy with a microphone. But one of his own guests rejected that logic on the air. Conservative commentator Douglas Murray told Rogan directly that throwing enough unverified claims at an audience makes the defense of just raising questions invalid at a certain scale. Rogan's reply was that he books guests because he finds them interesting, not because he has vetted what they believe. That answer, stated plainly and without apparent discomfort, is the structural engine of everything that followed. COVID was not a single lapse. Rogan hosted fringe climate contrarians who had been circulating the same debunked arguments since at least 2012, presenting them as dissident scientists bravely challenging consensus rather than as researchers whose work had not survived peer review. A guest named Darryl Cooper appeared and described Winston Churchill as the chief villain of World War II, while reframing Holocaust history in ways that professional historians described as counter-historical and dangerous. Conservative commentators who had appeared on the show themselves began saying publicly that the guest list had drifted toward people who had appointed themselves as experts without the credentials or record to support the title. In October 2024, Rogan hosted Donald Trump for nearly 3 hours. Trump made claims that went unchallenged across long stretches of the conversation. Days before the election, Rogan endorsed him. A peer-reviewed study published in APSA preprints found that listening to the Joe Rogan Experience was a stronger predictor of voting for Trump in 2024 than watching Fox News. even after researchers controlled for age, income, party identification, and prior voting history. The man who started with 2 laptops and no audience had, by the most rigorous measure researchers could apply, become a more powerful political force than the most watched cable news network in the country. Joe Rogan never set out to be a political force. He set out to talk to people he found interesting, in a room, without a script. The problem is that rooms have sizes, and his room holds 11 million people at a time. Whether a single person is responsible for what flows through a platform that large is a question media law, journalism ethics, and the audience itself have not resolved and may not resolve for a long time. What is documented is the arc, a comedian, a microphone, a deal worth at least $200 million, and a country that is still sorting out what it heard.